Welcome to Banyan Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyan.com. Since 1970, Banyan Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyan.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy.
Hello and welcome. Dorud be hameh azizan. Kheli khosh amadid. My name is Jacob Steele, the events manager for Banyan Books. Today we are honored to be hosting Mahnaz Afkhami in conversation with Samira Mohyeddin on Afkhami's new book, The Other Side of Silence, a memoir of exile, Iran, and the global women's movement. I would like to begin by acknowledging that although we have participants joining us from around the world, the physical location of Banyan Books is on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Our presenters today welcome your questions. Please type questions into the Q&A box at the screen at any point during the event. Now for introductions. Mahnaz Afkhami is the founder, president, and CEO of Women's Learning Partnership, and she served as the Minister for Women's Affairs in Iran from 1976 to 1978. She has been a leading advocate of women's rights for more than 4 decades. Afkhami's books have been published in many languages, and she serves on the advisory boards of such organizations as the Smithsonian Institute, the Global Fund for Women, and the World Movement for Democracy. Samira Mohyeddin is a multi-award-winning journalist and a producer at CBC Radio. It's such an honor to have them here with us today. از طرف کتاب فروش بنیان افتخار بزرگی است که امروز به شما خوش آمد بگویم و نظر شما را در مورد موضوعات مهمی که هست بشنویم. Please welcome Mahnaz Afkhami and Samira Mohyeddin.
Welcome and welcome to everyone. And just before I start, Jacob Steele, kudos to you on your Persian. That was very good.
Thank you.
Mahnaz, thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you to everyone else out there who is watching and listening. I just want to start by really asking you, how are you doing? Because it's been a whirlwind of 4 months for the Iranian diaspora. And I just want to start by asking you how you're doing. How are you holding up with all the news that's being bombarded at us daily from Iran?
Well, it's been, Samira Jan, it's been both extraordinarily encouraging and cheerful in the sense that quite unexpectedly, the very first revolution by women, supported by men, came from Iran, a country where for the last 40-some years, women have been almost without visibility, without the participation that they want, and without all the opportunities that they certainly deserve. But it's at the same time painful because of the harshness and the heartlessness with which they have been treated, and how much they have shown courage and and just strength in being there and stating what they have to state. So it's that combination of tears and laughter that me and my colleagues and friends feel almost every day.
Yeah, it's really been overwhelming, and as the young people these days say, it's been all the feels, you know, elation to despair to anger to sadness, all at the same time. And in the author's note to this book, you start off by talking about the importance of preservation, and I just want to know, why is that right now very important to you? What's going on that this preservation of documents, of research, of what the women's movement in Iran was in the 60s and 70s is so important?
Well, because people sort of get a little bit confused because of all the propaganda of the Islamic Republic and all of the lack of access and connection that is there and has been there. People are not free to move to Iran and go there or do research or sit and meet people. And then people are not free to express themselves how they wish. There is a lot of misunderstanding about Iranian women. And the fact of the matter is that Iranian women were very active for a long time. You know, in the 19th century, they began with Qurrat Olain, and who gave her life for her gender ideas and for her dedication to equality. And later as well, you know, with the various stages of development, because Iran was a very underdeveloped country at the beginning of the 20th century. There was hardly schooling for girls at all. There was no decent transportation. There was no legislative history. There was no courts or banks or any of the things that we have gotten used to. So it turned around with the coming of the constitutional revolution, and women were a part of that and did a lot to push it forward, even though the numbers were small, but the dedication was amazing. And after that, there was the new government of Reza Shah Pahlavi, who was very much dedicated to modernization and to development. And he was open to learning, because the unveiling that happened in Iran was actually a product of his travel to Ataturk's Turkey and learning from them that this was a very important thing. On the surface, it sounds like sort of clothing. What does it matter who wears what? But it was a symbol of all the limitations that could be placed on women just by covering them and having even their physical presence forbidden. So after that, almost every 2 years, something new happened. You know, education, the creation of a university, women participating in university education, women going outside the country and learning from others. So it just every year, every 2 years, something new happened. And then, of course, was the getting the vote, which was so important. And they were very, after the matter of education, the second thing was really getting the vote and the right to participate. And of course, that had the first revolution of Khomeini, as you know, brought about the first outburst and upheaval of the radical religion.
That's in 1963.
That, yes. Of course, that one was cut down, but the important part of this was, I think, the important part of women being committed to history, because sometimes even in America, where I live now, I feel that people are not as careful about learning from history as would be helpful, to them. And so it's the Khomeini revolution did exactly what he was going to say. He got to say later with the 1957, 1979 revolution. And so he was saying that women should be in the home, that women should not vote, that being dressed normally without full coverage is like prostitution. And of course, at that time, there were just 2 items of the 6 items of the white revolution of the time that he really opposed. One was women's right to vote, and the other one was reform, the agricultural reform.
Land reform, yes.
Land reform. So then the next time around, we had the same thing, although he had learned, or Mr. Khomeini had learned, not to be so forthright in terms of expressing what he had in mind. The second time, he did what was called taqiyya, that is, showing his intentions in the different light. And he talked about going to home and being a spiritual leader, not taking any part in the government. Women could have all the opportunities, nothing about hijab or anything. But as soon as he entered, before the constitution, before there was even any government, he first stated, he gave a fatwa about hijab and about family laws. And of course, the women who had participated in the revolution, not understanding the intention and thinking they're going to have more democracy, they immediately got it before anybody else. And they were the ones that 3 weeks after the Khomeini's takeover, they totally started the demonstrations on the 8th of March. And of course, they were completely shut down and hurt and beaten and violently approached. And so they couldn't do much, but they were the first to understand the mistake they had made.
And you sort of outline all of this in the book. It sort of weaves in and out this whole history of the women. And I want to get to the significance of that cloth, which we are seeing, young girls in the streets in Iran waving and burning at times. And just with the caveat that in 36, when Reza Shah did do the unveiling, it was a forced unveiling of women, but that changed over time. And so if I could start just by talking, you went through why it's important, this preservation, to almost write the history of what actually happened through the use of memoir. And you start the memoir with these 2 women, your 2 grandmothers. One you call an aristocrat, one you call a rebel. They seem to be sort of very opposites, but it seems like they've both influenced you in a lot of ways. How are they important to your life?
Oh, well, my aristocratic grandma was also a powerful woman. She run the farms and in essence, determined how the household would be taken care of, and the household meaning not just the everyday matters, but how the agricultural work was handled and all of that. So she was a powerful woman, but she thought that one had to sort of be diplomatic or have to be a little careful in how you step forward and what the consequences are. So she had that kind of attitude. My radical grandma was the first woman who suddenly decided that she wanted to be a Baha'i, and that's not an easy thing. at the time. This is almost 100 years ago, and then it was very unprecedented that someone from a family of Shiite Muslims that the Nafisis were, and she belonged to that. It was unprecedented. And what happened was that the family actually made her husband divorce her. And she was able to keep my mom, her child, when she promised that she would not encourage her to follow the faith. And she was the first entrepreneur in Kerman. And she spoke out and said whatever it was that she wanted to say. And she had a whole lot of young women whose life depended on her. So the two of them, one of them, the Baha'i one, sort of pushes me always to see beyond what is around the corner, to look forward a little bit further and to see the possibilities. And to judge the possibilities. The grandma, who was the aristocrat, sort of pushes me a little bit to be a little careful when I'm dealing with people who are not exactly on the same page as I am. So the two have helped me a lot, because sometimes later when I was in the government, for instance, it would help to understand how diplomacy works, which was her forte.
Yeah, I could tell that sometimes throughout the book, when you do become the Minister of Women's Affairs, sometimes the rebel comes out and sometimes the aristocrat is sitting on your shoulder saying, no, this isn't the right time. Keep quiet. And for those who don't know, Baha'i is a religious minority in Iran who are systemically persecuted in the country. They're not allowed any form of higher education. Their businesses are shut down. Their graves are desecrated, and the members of the faith are imprisoned. And so that has been happening throughout history, but more and more after the 1979 revolution. So if we can get back to the book, I don't want to give away too much that's in the book, but so you were talking that your parents' divorce. And at the age of 14, you moved to America to be with your mom. What was that like for you?
Well, it was very shocking because all of a sudden I was sort of one long flight, and I was from one way of living into a completely different universe. And my mom, who had been the mistress of this household in my father's world, suddenly was living in a small apartment with an American friend. And the very idea of sitting in the kitchen and eating right there, and then having the friend who was supposedly my godmother, wonderful American girl, she started calling me Leah, and brought me something a gift, with a scarf around my neck. I still wear scarves all the time from that time, and within a few minutes, I had a different name, and I was wearing a red scarf and a white Angora sweater, and in this space, and I couldn't even recognize myself, I mean, as if it was an entirely different, identity within minutes, but it wasn't unpleasant. It was just completely shocking.
While you're in the States, you meet your husband, you go to school, and you have your first job at a variety store. And this is where you have your sort of first experience with a union or standing up for your rights against a boss. And in the book, you write that sort of instance really helped you later on in your life when you returned to Iran. and are starting to organize and you know, whether it's in school or whether it's in your job. How did that experience in the US impact you?
It really was a defining experience, because my colleague or my boss, Rose, Spanish American, who didn't like, as I say in the book, didn't like university students working part-time at all. She was pretty tough with me, and you know, thought that I was just privileged and was there not as a worker. And she is the one, when I was you know, fired and then rehired, she was the one to explain to me that that was because they didn't want to pay for my vacation, you know. And then when I asked her, you know, about that and what is one to do, and she said, well, I don't know about you, but a worker would go to the union, you know. And then I went to the union, and it was an amazing experience to see these women, the solidarity between them, the way they talk to each other about the problems, and the way that they sort of seemed to embrace me and said, we'll take care of it. Don't worry, you know. So they did. The very idea that the big boss, this guy who never paid any attention to any of us, not even the more experienced people, let alone the workers from part-time workers, he came and kept asking, is everything okay? Are you happy? You know? So this whole experience just opened my eyes to the fact that together, you know, we multiply our power, that we can help each other. One person can't by any means do what a whole lot of united people can do together. And that's been one of the, you know, the main learnings of my adolescence and my school period. It's been amazingly helpful.
And so when you returned to Iran after all of that, you know, you got married, you finished your schooling, and you returned, what is not 1963 or is it 67?
It's 67.
So you returned in 67. You've gone 8 years or something like that. What are you returning to? How has Iran changed?
Iran had changed considerably. For one thing, one of the initiatives of the government, which was the follow-up to the ideas about educating the population in order to getting the development piece working positively, that was very, very helpful. The government sent something like 60,000 people, students, to the United States alone, and then there were others in Europe, to do education, higher education, and specialization. And just in several years, you know, there was just this wealth of people who had seen other countries, the more developed countries, and they had studied there, and they had been, you know, pretty well educated in specific fields. So by the time I got back, you know, even the number of women who were trained and skilled, because before they kept saying there aren't any women who can take this or that job, be engineer or be an electrician or whatever. But when they came back, you know, every year there would be more women who could take up these places, and men too. So it was an extraordinary step, and I think Iran was the only country that did it in that way and to that extent. And that was just one of the areas, because the local universities also were being expanded and growing. But the outside experience was very helpful also. To the extent, I was just going to say, to the extent that when I think back to the people that worked with me in the cabinet, almost all of them had a very sophisticated higher education in one of the European countries, you know, and that helped a great deal.
And so when you come back, you have your master's in hand, you start teaching, and you studied comparative literature.
Yes, English literature, actually.
Yeah, and so you're teaching English literature, and then you get offered a job. And so could you take us through that process and then what the job was at the Women's Organization of Iran?
Yes. I started teaching, and that the teaching at the university students were also a very important part of my future work, because when we were reading stories, and stories are amazing, how people relate to and can see themselves in the roles of the characters. And then the students were doing that, and they were very smart, and they were very good in English, because I used the same text that I used in America, in Iran. And they were very interested in women who were different and who had more freedoms and who had more freedom of movement, of choices, and so forth. But at the same time, they taught me that what they would want would be these possibilities, but they don't want to give up everything about their traditions or culture or the way they relate within the family. A lot of those they want to keep, but have those liberties contextualized within their family relations and cultural context. So that was a huge learning experience. And I don't think any other possibility would have taught me that so well. And that's why storytelling has been one part of our work as we developed it later in the global movement, and not just the Iranian one. So that was a very helpful thing, teaching there. And again, just getting to the job, being offered the job of the Secretary General of the Women's Organization was an outcome of teaching English literature, because I was soon, after only a year and a half, I was the head of the department, because the head of our department left for America. He was an American, and I took his place. And so what
Were you hesitant? Were you hesitant at all in taking on that role?
I don't think so. That was my other grandma. It wasn't my careful grandma. It was my crazy grandma. Yeah, you are not, And so coming out to me, no, I wasn't. But what I was hesitant was my lack of knowledge, because when actually Samira Jolly, who was Secretary General, she was a professor of psychology at the same university. And I was driving to the university with her from a speech, and she told me, by the way, Princess Ashraf is the head of the Iranian delegation at the UN, and what she wants to bring women into the foreign ministry. There just aren't any women, and she wants them to get to know this and so forth. So would you be willing to come to the UN General Assembly for that period? And I said, sure, why not? I would love that, Yes. And so there I met the princess, and learned a lot about how the UN works, how the diplomats work, how the different concerns of the government are presented, and so forth. And so following that, the princess, I think by accident actually, thought that I was, the one she wanted, because of her own presence, her own presence when I was giving a speech at the UN, because she had said that she wants the two women that she brought with herself to have a chance to present at one of the committees. And so I was doing that, and she came there to listen. And my speech was at the very end, And so she came to, after my speech, I got up and everybody got up to leave. And she came to, just say a kind word. And then Prince Adedin, who was the head of the committee, came down, and then all the ambassadors stood in line to come and congratulate. And this is also an accident. This is another thing I've learned from my two grandmas, actually, that a lot of stuff in life happened just by accident, you know. I mean, if I wasn't the last one to speak, and if she hadn't been there just to witness, she wouldn't have gotten this impression that I was this, you know, substantial person. Yeah, my speech was nothing special, you know. It was just the accident of this whole presentation that just really impacted her. So then she asked me to be the Secretary General. And then at the lunch, when she asked me to be Secretary General, I at first said, I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about women because my field is English. And I'm university professor. I don't know anything about how to organize or run an organization. And, you know, she just said, well, you know how it is. Men have more, you know, a sense of experimentation and trying things than women. I understand. And that that brought the other grandma back, you know, where I said, okay, then if I can stay at the university, I'll take the job. And so that's how that experience ended in my taking switching altogether from literature to
and I just want to read a bit from the book where you talk about your experience at the University Women's Association. This is even before you wrote that you realized that during your work in that group that the role of women, their sexuality, their status in the family and in the community is the pillar that holds up the entire edifice of culture, religion, and tradition. That once this pillar is shaken, the entire structure begins to tremble. And do you still believe that?
Oh, absolutely. The more I travel, and I think by now, me and my colleagues in Iran and actually now outside, I've gone to every part of the world. The thing is, the formula is exactly the same. It doesn't matter where you are. The formula is the same. It just looks different. You wear different clothes, different food on the table. But everywhere you go, the structure of patriarchy is exactly the same. And that's why the way to change it, you know, is also exactly the same in the sense that the whole idea is human rights and equality for all, but not in exactly the same in terms of the way you live it. That is, you want a goal that you share, which is full rights for all humans, but the way you implement it has to be substantially shaped by your culture and your condition when you begin gaining these.
And that lived experience of those women.
Absolutely.
And that came through, I mean, I know that you told Princess Ashraf that, you know, I don't know what I'm doing and stuff, but the Women's Organization of Iran, for those who don't know, ends up having more than 300 branches throughout the country and was really responsible for implementing some really huge changes in the country and changing people's ideas. When you went into areas such as Baluchistan, Kurdistan, and other areas that, let's say, you know, aren't city centers, how did you approach sort of getting women to get involved in the organization? What were you doing exactly?
You know, our women's organization actually groups in different cities and villages where people from backgrounds that were a little bit varied, but not too. That is, either they were working in agriculture or working in labor, or they were teaching school. And they were very, you know, eager to participate because what we did, also because of the way we approached. We asked the women themselves. When I first went, the first year that I was at the Women's Organization, a group of us, you know, went to 40 different parts of Iran and a variety of places, and mostly factories and schools and even prisons, agricultural villages and so forth. And we asked women, what were the top challenges? What were the things they really wanted? And for instance, one of the things that I never forget is the way that people in the factories, for instance, men and women in the factories reacted. We thought, that is, I personally thought, that what women want is legal rights, legislative laws. And every time we asked somebody, what is it that you want? They talked about how much they get paid, what the conditions are. And they kept repeating that, and I remember I said, well, do you care, to a woman in Isfahan in a factory? I said, do you care if you have the right to divorce, for instance? And she said, yeah, but what's the use of the right to divorce if I have to leave my husband and go live under my father's shelter? And we understood that what she's talking about is economic independence. But unless you have economic independence, legal progressiveness is helpful, but it doesn't take care of it. And then also you learn that in order to be able to support yourself, you need education. So these are all connected together. And that's why, for instance, at the branches, we for one thing had the branches, the offices in some home or in some place in the middle of the least advantageous kind of circumstances, close to the poorest areas. And also what we had was services for women, because once we learned that they wanted to get an education or skills and learn to work, then they needed childcare centers. Then once they learned that, there would be little battles in the home and they needed legal advice, so we had legal guidance for them. And these centers that developed in less advantaged parts of the cities and villages, they became so popular. There was the last year we were in Iran, there were 1 million people in 1 year that came to these centers, and of course, along with these services was also mobilization and learning about rights and what they can have and what they should have, and so that mobilization was extraordinarily helpful.
So as these sort of seismic shifts are happening in society in Iran in the 60s, 70s, and in women's lives, you are offered a position to become the Minister of Women's Affairs. This position didn't exist before. And so again, this is a new learning experience for you, sort of carving out something that didn't exist. And so how do you, again, approach this new ministry? Now, I have to tell people out there who are listening who may not know, there were only two at the time Minister of Women's Affairs in the entire world governments. It was Iran and France. So let's just set that stage and then tell us sort of how you went about really making a mandate for yourself, which didn't exist.
Well, what happened was that we'd invited Françoise Giroud, who was the first Minister of Women, to come to Iran, as a matter of fact, just before, right during the Women's Year, International Women's Year, following the Mexico conference. And we had a lot of things going on during that year. There were a seminar a month in every particular state. A seminar that ended in publications and on different topics. And we also had the first film festival for women. Just out of the blue, we just wrote to people who had made films and had festivals around the world. And they wrote back and said, yes, we're coming, we'll do it, and we had this beautiful festival, and Iranians loved those, more than ordinary, And so there was a lot of visibility for the women's organization. And then we'd already done a lot at the conference in Mexico City. The princess was the head of the Iranian delegation, and also the head of the committee, the preparatory committee for the conference. So we had a lot of stuff in we wrote the draft that became the product of the first conference on women in Mexico City. So all of that gave a lot of visibility and so forth. But nevertheless, the morning when the prime minister called and said, the position of women is very important and we want to have a minister of women, I was just sort of dumbfounded. I had no idea that that I'm going to be that. And so I just sort of, couldn't answer him right away. But apparently there was no, not apparently, actually I experienced that there was no system. There was nothing that described what a women's affairs minister is supposed to do. So that turned out to be very much to our advantage. Because whenever we thought of something that would be helpful, we would say, how about this, and they said, maybe that's what a woman's minister should do. One of them was that we said that something that later became a slogan, all issues are women's issues, and later became a slogan. But what we did, we said, well, okay, if we're going to have something to do with equality for women, equal opportunity, what we have to do is have all of the ministers who have programs from agriculture to plan and budget to economics to welfare, whatever, education, they should sit together, and the highest person, the prime minister, should guide that annual meeting to see how the plans for women's participation are going. And once a month, I will sit with their senior deputy together, and we will look to see how we're doing, which is an amazing thing. It's never been repeated anywhere. And I wish if we had stayed, if our system had not fallen apart, some would say that's why it fell apart. It could also be, I don't know, maybe there was too much, but I don't believe that quite. But if we had sustained it, it would have been a real prototype for a lot of women's ministries. And all issues of women's issues were in fact taken as such, and each ministry had a timeline and had programs and had budgets for how they're going to make women participate in development.
There was this sense, though, you get this sense when you're reading the book that you were always, there was this sense that you shouldn't be poking the bear too much. And by the bear, I mean the religious clerics. And everyone seemed to sort of participate in that. They were always the elephant in the room. How do you go about trying to make changes while keeping the sort of religious right and very reactionary clerics in mind? How do you even go about doing that?
Well, actually, we learned a lot from our people on the ground, For instance, there was this wonderful woman, Shamsia Amiri, in Mashhad in Khorasan province, and she was both one of the most advanced feminists at the time, even today, but at the same time, she knew how to deal with these things. For instance, she would have people come and teach the Quran, for instance, but then seeing a positive side of the Quran. She would invite people, the wives or daughters or sisters of the religious people to participate, and she would make them see what a woman should do. So if a wife or daughter or sister does that, it makes a difference on the mullah himself, gradually. And then at the same time, she did all kinds of very progressive, like teaching repair of electric utilities or utensils. So she had all kinds of, or sports, that were very advanced for women. So the idea is not to negate something that is so dear to people, which is their beliefs, and to see that all religions have come in the context of history. That is, even though we are living at the same time, we are not contemporary. And that, but the religions, all of them, I have a whole list of some of the things that are repeated in Islam, that are repeated in Christianity, in Judaism, and all of the others. So they're beautiful stuff that are love thy neighbor, or all of that, but then there are also really things that are outdated and impossible to do. So we were playing it carefully. We would bring up stuff, but we wouldn't do it in a way that would be aggressive or difficult to stomach, and a step at a time. And when we got, one of my most difficult challenges were when I worked with the Minister of Justice, and the Ministry of Justice is the most conservative, because they deal with the laws. And when I worked with them, the law that we wanted to, the family protection law that we wanted to work with, we could get some things and we couldn't get other things, So it wasn't perfect. It didn't completely, let's say, nullify polygamy, but it says only one wife with the acceptance of the first wife, and if the conditions of the first wife requires it, so that it's not really a marriage. But once this happened, it was really a challenge, because when since I'd worked with the Minister of Justice and we had come to an agreement, I couldn't fully defend this, because obviously it wasn't perfect. But I couldn't also say, oh, this is terrible, because I had helped agree, So there are places that, challenging, it's really challenging. But as soon as we did it, we started doing the next revision, So that was one of the things. We get what we can right now, and then immediately start going to the next place, and use as neutral and normal presence and way of speaking and vocabulary, the most, unemotional and least exaggerated vocabulary that could say the same thing, that we wanted to say.
And so that's the aristocratic grandmother coming out.
Exactly.
Right now, thank you. And so you talked a little bit just before about, if it hadn't broken down, and I guess by broken down, I guess you mean the revolution happening, where women in Iran would have been today. And you touched briefly on the family protection law. And in the book, you write that to this day, that law remains the most advanced law for women in the region. Could you just quickly go through what it was exactly that the family protection law was?
The family protection law, in effect, defines the relationship between a woman within the family, which means everything from childcare to marriage itself, to divorce, to polygamy, to the right to work, to the position of a woman in the family, which is the institution that shapes the way people, humans, behave outside of that, because that's where it's shaped. And sometimes we don't quite see our own role as women, as mothers, as sisters, as daughters in shaping that, and either acquiescing, I don't know how you say that, acquiescing to that, or to fighting it. We define that. So that's what the family law is all about. That's why it's so difficult to change it, because it changes everything. It's the architecture of human relationships, I call it. It's the way it shapes the human relationships, because that's replicated in school, it's replicated in communities, it's replicated in the political, economic system, and it definitely is supported by the religion, you know. So it's so difficult to change, because it, you know, actually defines everything in life. And it's the hardest thing to really change. But if you work with men, for one thing, first, you know, and if you let them know how, of course, you know, the other thing that we did was we didn't keep thinking that we have to, you know, educate men or make them advocate directly with them so much, but learn ourselves what kind of thing do we want, you know, and why do we want it? And first educate ourselves so that we would not be patriarchal to begin with in our own behavior, telling our little girls that you must wear pink, and girls, you know, shouldn't do this or that, or tell our boys you can't cry, or boys don't cry, or be tough, or whatever. I mean, just simple things like that to the more complicated things. So we should educate ourselves first to see what kind of world do we want, what kind of relationships, and then try to communicate with the men. And that's what the Iranians now have done, you know. The Iranians in Iran, the young girls, they really have come out to start this, but they have brought the men in with them, not as, you know, antagonists, but as supporters. And that started with the 1 million signatures campaign. And we have had the inside-outside communication with our friends in Iran all along in these last 2 decades, especially, and watched them, you know, create these situations and create these collaborations, which has been fantastic. And I think that's why it's such a fantastic model globally, you know, for the women's movement.
Just to give a background for people, the 1 million signatures campaign was a campaign launched in the early 2000s by women's rights activists in Iran. It was also part of the Stop Stoning campaign. And you touched briefly on this insider outsider. You know, you went into exile, and you tell that story in the book about getting this phone call telling you not to come back, and about the arrest and hanging of Farrokh Parsa, who people can read about in the book. But it was important for you, why, to keep that connection with women in Iran? Why was it important for you?
Well, for one thing, because I had such a connection with the country, you know. I mean, even though I've lived most of my life in the United States, either as a student or working in exile, but there is, us Iranians, you know, have this real connection with Iranian culture and Iranian country, you know. That is one of it. And the other is that I had seen what they were doing, and how carefully, and how in what interesting ways they had brought about these extraordinary, unequal situations for women in Iran. The way we were at the end of the period when the revolution happened is really not replicated in very many places, especially not in the global South. So that's why I wanted to use that experience, that knowledge, that wisdom that has been created in that country, and be able to help them regain it, and also to use it for the global movement. That's what Women's Learning Partnership is all about sharing knowledge, about learning about learning from each other, about dialogue, about participatory leadership. And so I thought that that was a perfect model for experience that we've had to use that globally as well, and inside outside, because as we see in Afghanistan, as we see in Iran, as we probably unfortunately will see in other countries, even open countries become closed. And once they become closed, you really have to have ways of helping the women inside, or the men inside, both of them, to open up, to be able to get information and to get to pass on information. And one of our lucky breaks has been the social media. It's been used badly also, but the social media makes this possible, makes learning possible. And that's why we have a whole new program on inside, outside, and open and closed societies.
For people who don't know, the Women's Learning Partnership is a global women's rights organization founded, and Mahnaz is the director of it. So you were still doing your women's rights work even after you were exiled. There was a lot of the things in this book. There are moments in Iranian history that you sort of provide the details on, and the back channels that we don't know about. And so, for instance, I didn't know that the offices of the Women's Organization of Iran, which was on Takht Jamshid Avenue, was destroyed, that its documents were destroyed. And I'm just wondering, with the writing of this book, are you hoping to sort of revivify that history and provide that history to people?
Absolutely. I think that I feel particularly responsible because I happened to start everything very young in my life. I was 18 when I got married, I went to college when I was 16. So I was in a hurry always. So that's why I'm alive. Lots of my colleagues, some of them, of course, unfortunately, such as Farrokhru, were murdered for nothing except dedication to her country. But others, Mancherian, Senator Mancherian, others have passed. There aren't very many people who have that history, and very many of them don't any longer have the documents. So we have all of that, and we have gathered it together and as Women's Learning Partnership. And we are building archival material from the Global South to help with building a really global movement, not Western, not Eastern, but a global movement based on shared ideas and shared concepts, but contextualized to fit the time and place and the culture that people have at the moment.
I'm not sure how much you've been watching the protests and what's been happening in Iran, but there was something that happened in early October of last year at, I believe it was at Amir Kabir University, where there was footage of the boys and girls at the university knocking down the wall that separated them in the cafeteria from eating together. And I was reading your book, and on page 127, you say that you got a call from your deputy at the time saying that male students were demonstrating at the university that they wanted the cafeteria to be sex segregated. This is in 1977. It just sort of blew my mind, because here I was seeing these young kids breaking down that wall. What does it feel like for you because you're so invested in sort of having, you put this family protection law together, they come along and they get rid of it right away. That's one of the first things they did. And what does it feel like for you to see what is happening in Iran at the moment?
Well, I'm hoping, I'm very optimistic, I'm very optimistic because of what I have seen women do in Iran. throughout the years, what I've read about them and what I've witnessed myself, And I think that I'm not surprised so much that the global women's movement will be initiated by Iranian women. This should have been done in 1957. But not,
79.
sorry, 1357 or 1979. I mixed the dates. 1979. It should have started then because we were ready. We had done the experiments. We had found the way together with not only with Iranian women, but we traveled to Soviet Union, to China, to India, to Iraq. We learned from everybody. And we had put these things together, and it was ready for the Ministry of Women, all of the family laws, all of the things, the support that women had who had children as employees, childcare on the premises, 7 months of pregnancy leave, half-time work with full-time benefits. All of that we had done, you see, and that's what we wanted.
That's crazy.
That's,
people don't
people
don't even have that now.
Exactly. In the United States, with all of its democratic history and with all of its scientific and financial possibilities, we are not anywhere where we should be, near where we should be. So I'm not surprised that Iranians have done this, and I'm hoping that others have done it. They are doing it. You see, from some small group in some small town in Germany to the Parliament of France to Canada to everywhere. European Union, everywhere. People are doing this. They're supporting this because it is based on the learning, the cultural sharing that people have had for all of these years, and the courage that they have, and maybe in a way, if the Islamic Republic wasn't as savage as it is, maybe it wouldn't have this kind of reaction. So if that ends up in a global movement, which is so much needed now, where the world is so interconnected, and we are facing so much misery, from climate justice needed to refugees that are a cause of climate, caused by climate partly, and by poverty, and the violence that we are all facing. All these wars, we are not finished with Ukraine. We are already thinking of China. So we really need, as women, to work with men to say, cut it out. This is ridiculous. We can't live like this. We can't have our children and grandchildren live in this kind of a world. What in heaven's name are we doing? And I think the Iranians are giving an example that is workable. And the way people have reacted, men and women, it shows that there is need for seeing the necessity of interconnectedness and the reality of it, and how whatever happens in one part of the world has a reaction in another part of the world. And if we're going to change this situation, if we want to stop from pandemics to climate to war, we have to have the women take the part that they haven't had and lead this movement. There are no Gandhis, there are no Mandelas, there are no Martin Luther Kings, who are all men. Now we need some women to come out and do what they can do. But that needs a movement.
Why do you think, and this is a pretty broad question, but there's a lot of criticism about the changes and the laws and the rights that happened in the 60s and 70s. The criticism being that they were fake, they were just cosmetic, they weren't real. And there's a real vilification by some of the women's organization of Iran. Why do you think that is? Where does that come from?
Well, part of it was, part of it was the change that is a huge change. it's a very difficult, complicated, and infrastructural change. That change is always hard for a lot of people. The other is that Iran was put in a place between the Soviet Union and the Tudeh Hizb and the Marxist offshoots of it that were constantly, very urgently, and very successfully sending propaganda all over the intellectual part of the country. And then at the same time, there was the fear of the religious people, not just religious, but people who didn't want to change to happen, and mostly for their own properties, or because don't forget that the issues of agricultural developments in Iran had a hell of a lot to do with the mullahs' property, because
Clergy, yes.
because that was given to them. So the far right and far left were very good at propaganda, and also they came together at the end. My own sister, a wonderful woman as she was, for the longest time, when she came out of Iran when she was 11, she didn't know anything about Iran, but she became a Marxist and a really strong far left Marxist. She lost her husband in this process, but then she changed her life, her mindset, and changed her way of behaving toward the end. But so this propaganda between far right and far left, and the fact that they united, the far left began wearing chadors and even wearing gloves, to cover their hands to accommodate the Khomeini side of the revolution. So there was a lot of that, and of course the change was too huge and too all-encompassing. If we had not had the perfect storm, we would all be in a different place.
What do you want? I'm going to get. There's a lot of questions in the chat, but I'll just end with this. And I could talk to you for hours, but unfortunately we don't have that much time. What do you want people to take away most from this memoir?
Well, the reality of the women's struggle in Iran, the fact that having a savage government like we have now, and an ignorant government like we have now, and a corrupt one, does not bring about positive and positive reactions and great ideas. This is what has happened in the past, it's history.
I'm just going to go through some of these questions. Let's see. So there's a question that says, where do you think the women's movement since September, so I guess since these protests started, where the women's movement since September is heading in Iran? Will they be able to change the regime without any leadership at this point?
I think that what they have done is very wise. The fact that women have been successful in bringing the men with them. The fact that they have not really dictated what kind of government they want without waiting to see what the people will say. What they're saying is the conceptual woman life liberty. No one objects to that. If you keep that, the holistic wish that you have for human rights generally, and then work together to create a situation where people will be able to express both their wisdom and their wishes in forming a government, then it will be possible. So the thing that is very important is to keep the visibility of these young women and men, and to keep their possibility of continuing their efforts, because it is not easy in the face of violence and all the threats that they face. It's not easy to continue unless the world does what it's doing. So we really have to make sure that we make that apparent all the time.
There's a question from Roya. She says, what are the top 3 demands of Iranians inside Iran that you that you would think is most important to address to preserve justice and freedom in the next decade to come?
Well, I think they've said it themselves, woman, life, and liberty.
And what does that slogan mean to you? Because a lot of people, are interpreting it in their own way. What does it mean for you, women, life, liberty?
Well, I think the women part of it very wisely talks about gender change, gender relations change, so that there is equality and support from both sides for each other, men and women working together, which is so much wiser than sometimes we as feminists in America have said in the past, that is separating men and women and then asking for a percentage of the rights that men have. We want all of the rights, and many rights that people don't even have yet. We want to have all of those beyond equality, and we want to have it together, not separately, because no half of the population can ignore the other half. So women is that. And then life is life led as human beings. What is the constitutes the various sides of life? Having enough to have a decent life, to not be poor, to not be without shelter, without food, without security, and then liberty or freedom, which again is a component of all that we all want. So in general, I think they cover the whole field, but they don't specify in types of government or what kind of organization, because that takes the participation and the thinking of the entire population to decide what kind of work they want. And I think that the inside-outside connection between women outside, who are very sophisticated and very well off in every way, with the inside is vital to continuation.
There's a question from Yalda. In the book, you mentioned briefly that you hosted Khomeini's grandson at your house. What was that like? How did it feel to host him?
Well, it was not easy because we didn't know what to expect, but the thing that made it easier for me personally is that my colleague, Hormuz Hikmat, who worked with me for many years and was the editor of our journal, he had seen him and he said he's really interesting, and we should see him. So he was in fact a very open-minded person, a very easy to talk to, reasonable person, and it's sort of enforced my own idea that dialogue is important. Even if you don't know what somebody like grandkids of Khomeini are going to say, dialogue, if it's possible, if the man is willing to come and sit and talk, And then before long, I mentioned in the book that he kept saying us, that is me and him, we were in the same way of looking at spirituality and religion, which is amazing, after just a few conversations.
How do you feel about someone like Faiza Hashemi, for instance, who has been quite active speaking out against the government? Do you have any contact with her at all, or?
No, unfortunately, I don't. We've spoken at the same events, consecutively. But no, I don't. I think I don't know that much about what she's going through right now, but I think what she says makes sense, and what she's trying to do is positive. So I try not to hold people responsible for their family or for their own past, even if they're in a place where they're pushing toward what we're all hoping. Why not? I welcome her.
I've seen you also. You've been attending protests in Washington D.C. And you were in a photo I saw with Azara Nafisi, professor and author of Reading Lolita in Tehran and many other books. She in that book she says that the Iranian Revolution at times felt like a war on women. Did it feel that way to you?
Yes. Yes, it did. Because one thing that it seemed both the far left and the far right had the unified vision of was the place of women. They didn't express it the same, but I think that the far left sometimes takes for granted, if they have Marxist governments or whatever, automatically some kind of equality comes about. And by that, they usually did in their organizations, they really did not give leadership to women. They did not have the respect that one expects, for women. But the radical right also is the same. Unfortunately, though, I must say something that is going to be, I'm going to really have to deal with in the future. It's my Baha'i grandma in me. But we as feminists have done that too, you see. We as feminists have backed up slogans like defund the police, for instance, or Me Too, which in essence, the idea is right. The idea, of course, everybody follows, both the racial equality and also a police that is more responsible. But how you say it makes a lot of difference. As feminists, we have somehow shunned men sometimes, or said things like, for instance, if women have been hurt, they have been put under horrific circumstances at times. They have been, we all know how some women, or a lot of women, have been treated. But we don't want to replicate that against the other half of the population. If we have a cause, we have to be heard, and justice has to come about. But justice has a process. It's not because I say so. See, because anybody can say so about anybody and ruin that person, and they have done it to women. We don't want to replicate that about men.
There are a lot of questions here on the page about what your thoughts are on the tactics of someone like Ms. Masih Ali-Najad and her activities regarding the women's movement. What do you think of her tactics? What grandmother is coming out in you? When you think about that?
I think Masih is doing a good job. She has brought a lot of attention. She has a lot of courage, and she is a person who's comfortable in public, and can bring ideas to the public, and so I mean, she should not be expected to have the kind of input that perhaps some other person could very well bring about. But we need all sorts of courageous people with all sorts of talents to make this holistic global movement possible. So Masih has had an important role in bringing interest when there wasn't so much interest, and she's courageous, and she speaks out of what she feels. We might not match that or agree with all of it, but we have to use the talents of our people to the utmost.
There's also a lot of people asking how they can get in touch with you. There's a lot of people asking how they can get in touch with you. How can someone reach out to you if they want to?
Oh well, if they would send an email, I would. Tori is on, my colleague. I mean, Tori is not. Kate is on, my colleague, and she will get it. If they say wlp@learningpartnership.org, Kate will get it to me, and I will be very happy to.
So they can reach out to you through your organization, the Women's Learning Partnership.
Although almost everyone who even wants to get in touch with me, I'm sure I would love to get in touch with, but there might be some who don't, and I get very hurt very quickly. So let Kate intervene and get me the ones that I should see.
Okay, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Let's do one more question. We went through that one. There's a question from a gentleman named Behdad. He's asking what your observations are on the Islamic Republic's Department for Women and Family Affairs.
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. Because we know from what the Islamic Republic's view of women is, and how strict they are in limiting any change, even child marriage, even any of that. I wouldn't unfortunately, have nothing positive to say about that.
We should point out too that part of that family protection law was having the marriage age raised to 18 for girls, which the Islamic revolutionaries, when they came to power, lowered to 9, and which now sets at 13. And the UN has said, there are hundreds of child marriages every year in the Islamic Republic. Before we go, just first of all, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to everyone else listening out there. There is this, you are in exile, you've been in exile, you say you lived your life longer. Many of us, 8 million of us now in exile. Do you look to going back? Are you hopeful that you will go back to Iran one day?
Of course, Samira, there you did it again. I can't be asked that question without just suddenly having tears in my eyes. Of course, I would love to go to Iran. That's my dying wish that I would be in that country. It's what I most want. It's my most.
I hope you get to go with your granddaughter.
I would love that. Yes. And I hope so with us.
Really mamnoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As a representative of Banyan Books, I would like to thank all of you for coming out today. And especially, I'd like to thank our honored presenters. And a note to all that Mahnaz Afkhami's new book, The Other Side of Silence, is available from banyan.com. Learn more about her work at mahnazafkhami.com. And Samira Mohyeddin's work you can find at CBC's website and on Instagram at @mohyeddin. On behalf of the Banyan Books community, thank you all for coming out today. از همه شما عزیزان سپاس گذارم که امروز در اینجا حضور داشتید. Thank you both, and till next time. خداحافظ. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyan Books and Sound. Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyan Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyan.com.